क्लास 12 एनसीईआरटी, ये आपका थर्ड यूनिट है। किनशिप, कास्ट एंड क्लास, अर्ली सोसाइटी, दैट इज 600 BC से 600 CE तक। इसके पहले वाले चैप्टर में हमने देखा कि बहुत सारे चेंजेस हुए थे इकोनॉमी में और पॉलिटिकल लाइफ में 600 BC से 600 CE तक। सम ऑफ दीज चेंजेस इन्फ्लुएंस सोसाइटी एज वेल। फॉर इंस्टेंस द एक्सटेंशन ऑफ एग्रीकल्चर इनटू, अभी क्या दिया जाता था, ब्राह्मण को लैंड ग्रांट दिया जाता था अग्रहारा, तो फॉरेस्टेड एरियाज में भी एग्रीकल्चर होने लग गया। इट ट्रांसफॉर्म द लाइव्स ऑफ फॉरेस्ट फिलर क्राफ्ट स्पेशलिस्ट ऑफन इमर्ज एज डिस्टिंक्टिव सोशल ग्रुप। द अनइक्वल डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन ऑफ वेल्थ शार्पन सोशल डिफरेंसेस। सोसाइटी में डिफरेंस बहुत ज़्यादा होने लग गया। स्टोरीज ऑफन यूज टेक्सुअल ट्रेडिशन टू अंडरस्टैंड दीज प्रोसेस। सम टेक्स्ट ले डाउन नॉर्म्स ऑफ सोशल बिहेवियर, अदर डिस्क्राइब्स एंड ओकेजनली कमेंट ऑन अ वाइड रेंज ऑफ सोशल सिचुएशंस एंड प्रैक्टिस। तो कुछ हिस्टोरियन जो है इनको समझने की कोशिश करते हैं, कुछ जो है सोशल बिहेवियर पे, कुछ other describe occasionally comment on a wide range of social situation and practice. We can also catch a glimpse of some social actors from inscription. As we will see, each text inscription was written from the perspective of specific social category. So we need to keep in mind who composed what and for whom. We also need to consider the language used and the ways in which the text circulated. Use carefully, text allow us to piece together attitude and practice that shape social history. In focusing on the Mahabharata, a colossal epic है, running in its present form into over 1 lakh verses with depiction of a wide range of social category and situation, we draw on one of the richest texts of the subcontinent. It was composed over a period of about 1000 years, that is 500 BCE onward. And some of the stories it contains may have been in circulation even earlier. The central story is about two sets of warring cousins. The text also contains sections laying down norms of behavior for various social groups. Occasionally, though not always, the principal characters seem to follow these norms. What does conformity with norms and deviation from them signify? ये एक टेराकोटा का स्कल्पचर है depicting a scene from the Mahabharata in West Bengal 17th century onward. उसके बाद फिर देखते हैं हम लोग द क्रिटिकल एडिशन ऑफ महाभारत, वन ऑफ द मोस्ट एम्बिशियस प्रोजेक्ट ऑफ द स्कॉलरशिप बिगिन इन 1919 में अंडर द लीडरशिप ऑफ अ नोटेड इंडियन संस्कृत VS Sukthankar. एक टीम बनाई comprising dozens of scholars initiated the task of preparing a critical edition of Mahabharata. What exactly did this involve? Initially, it meant collecting Sanskrit manuscript of the text, जो भी मतलब जो संस्कृत manuscript था इस text का महाभारत का, लिया गया written a variety of script from different part of the country. फिर टीम ने वर्क किया the method of comparing verses from each manuscript. Ultimately, they selected the verses what appeared common to most version and published these in several volumes, जिसमें 13,000 pages है. The project took 47 years to complete. Two things became apparent. There were several common elements in the Sanskrit version of the story, evident in manuscript found all over the subcontinent from Kashmir, Nepal in the north to Kerala, Tamil Nadu in the south. Also evident were enormous regional variations in the ways in which the text has been transmitted over the centuries. These variations were documented in footnotes, appendices to the main text taken together. More than half the 13,000 pages were devoted to these variations. In a sense, these variations are reflective of the complex process that shaped early social histories through dialogues between the dominant traditions and the resilient local ideas and practices. These dialogues are characterized by moments of conflict as well as consensus. Our understanding of these processes derive primarily from the text written in Sanskrit by and for Brahmins. When issue of social history were explored for the first time by historians, social history, अभी हम इकोनॉमिक और पॉलिटिकल पे ज़्यादा फोकस करते हैं, सोशल हिस्ट्री पे ठीक है, कब फोकस हुआ 19 and 20th century. They ended to take this text at face value, believing that everything that was laid down in this text was actually practiced. Subsequently, scholars began studying other traditions from works in Pali, Prakrit, Tamil. These studies indicate that the ideas contained in normative Sanskrit texts were on the whole recognized as authoritative. They were also questioned and occasionally even rejected. It is important to keep this in mind as we examine how historians reconstruct social history. एक एडिशन है, sorry, just wait a minute. Okay, got it. Section of the page from the critical edition. This section printed in large bold letters is part of the main text. The smaller print lists variation in different manuscripts which were carefully cataloged. So, kinship and marriage, many rulers and varied practice. We often find about families. We often take family life for granted. However, you may have noticed that not all families are identical. They vary in terms of number of members, उनके relationship with one another, as well as the kind of activity they share. Often, people belonging to the same family, they share food and other resources, and live and work, perform rituals together. Families are usually part of a larger network of people defined as relative, or to use a more technical term, kinfolk. तो फैमिली बहुत सारी फैमिली मिलकर बनाती है किनफो. While familiar ties are often regarded as natural and based on blood, they are defined in many different ways. For instance, some societies regard cousin as being blood relation, whereas others do not regard cousins as blood relation. For early societies, historians can retrieve information about the allied families fairly easily. It is, however, far more difficult to reconstruct the familiar relationship of ordinary people. Historians also investigate and analyze attitude towards family and kinship. These are important because they provide an insight into the people's thinking. It is likely that some of these ideas would have shaped their action, just as actions may have led to changes in attitude. Sanskrit text used the term kula. Kula किसके लिए to designate families, nati for the larger network of kinfolk. The term vamsha is used for lineage. अब ये याद करना, कुल family, janati kinfolk बहुत सारी family, vamsha lineage. Patrilineal means the ideal of patrilineal. Can we identify points when kinship relationship? At one level, Mahabharata is a story about this. It describes a feud over land and power between two groups of cousins, a Kaurava and Pandava, who belonged to a single ruling family, that of the Kurus, a lineage dominating one of the Janpadas. Ultimately, the conflict ended in a battle in which the Pandavas emerged victorious. After that, जो patrilineal succession था was proclaimed. While patrilineal had existed prior to the composition of the epic, the central story of the Mahabharata reinforced the idea that it was valuable. Under patrilineal, sons could claim the resources, including the throne in the case of the king of their fathers when the latter died. Most ruling dynasties 6th century BCE onward claimed to follow this system, although there were variations in practice. Sometimes there were no sons. तब तो कुछ करना पड़ेगा. Patrilineal means training descent from father to son and grandson and so on. Matrilineal means the term used when the descent is traced through the mother. ठीक है, वंशा पढ़ लिया ना, कुला जनती वंशा. ठीक है, अब ये एक फिगर देख लो, बहुत ध्यान से पढ़ना है इसे. दिस इज कुरु पंचाल रीजन एंड इट्स नेबरिंग. तो ये आपका कुरु है, गंगा पे हस्तिनापुर बना है, यमुना पे आपका मथुरा है, इंद्रप्रस्थ है, और कौशंबी है, वत्सा है, गंगा रिवर पे, सारनाथ वाराणसी हो गया. ठीक है, ये आपका इधर दिख रहा है बौद्ध गया, पाटलिपुत्र है, ये वैशाली, पाटलिपुत्र के जैसे ऊपर वैशाली है, फिर कुशीनगर है, पावाल साक्या है, ये कपिलवस्तु लुम्बिनी नेपाल में, मल्ला पावा श्रावस्ती, कुशाला, अयोध्या, वत्सा, कौसंबी, यहाँ पे उज्जैन अवंती, कुरु, हस्तिनापुर, इंद्रप्रस्थ, शूरसेना, विराटा, मथुरा. ठीक है, नीचे बढ़ते हैं. In some situations, brothers succeeded one another. Sometimes other kinsmen claimed the throne, and in very exceptional circumstances, women such as Prabhavati Gupta exercised power. Gupta dynasty के थी. The concern with patrilineal was not unique to ruling families. It is evident in mantras and ritual texts such as Rig Veda. It is possible that these attitudes were shared by wealthy men and those who claim high status, including Brahman. Producing fine sons. Here is an excerpt of a mantra from the Rig Veda, which was probably inserted in the text in 1000 BCE to be chanted by the priest while conducting the marriage ritual. It is used in many Hindu weddings even today. I free her from here, but not from there. I have bound her firmly there, so that through the grace of Indra, she will have fine sense and be fortunate in her husband's love. Indra, one of the principal deities, a god of valor, warfare, and rain. Here and there refer to the father and husband's house respectively. अब यहाँ पे देखो, why kinfolk quarrel. There is an excerpt from Adi Parvan, literally the first section of the Sanskrit Mahabharata, describing why conflict arose among the Kaurava and Pandava. Kaurava were the son of Dhritarashtra and Pandava were the cousins. Since Dhritarashtra was blind, his younger brother Pandu ascended the throne of Hastinapur. However, after the premature death of Pandu, Dhritarashtra became regent as the royal princess was still very young. As the princes grew up together, the citizens of Hastinapur began to express their preference for the Pandava. For they were very capable and virtuous than the Kauravas. This made Duryodhana, the eldest of the Kauravas, very jealous. He approached his father and said, "You yourself did not receive the throne, although it fell to you. because of your defect. If the Pandavas receive the patrimony from Pandu, his son will surely inherit it in turn, and so will his son and his. If we ourselves with our sons shall be excluded from the royal succession and become of slight regard in the eyes of the world, Lord of the earth. Passages such as these may not have been literally true, but they give us an idea about what those who wrote the text thought. Sometimes, as in the case, they contain conflicting ideas. Rule of marriage. While sons were important for the continuity of the family, daughters were viewed rather differently within this framework. They had no claims to the resources of the household. मतलब उनके पापा के वेल्थ पे कोई भी हाथ ही नहीं है, उनका कोई मतलब नहीं है. एट द सेम टाइम मैरिंग देम इनटू फैमिलीज आउटसाइड द किन वाज कंसिडर्ड डिजायरेबल कि मैरिज अलायंस बना लेंगे. दिस सिस्टम कॉल्ड एक्सोगैमी लिटिंग मैरिंग आउटसाइड meant that the lives of the young girls and women belonging to families that claim high status were often carefully regulated to ensure that they were married at the right time to the right person. This gave rise to the belief that Kanyadan, or the gift of daughter in marriage, was an important religious duty of the father. With the emergence of new town, social life became very complex. People from near and far met to buy and sell their hair products and share ideas in the urban milieu. This may have led to the questioning of earlier beliefs and practice. Faced with this challenge, the Brahmins responded by laying down codes of social behavior in great detail. They were meant to be followed by Brahmins in particular and the rest of the society in general. 500 BC, these norms were compiled in Sanskrit text. उनको लिख दिया गया धर्मसूत्र और धर्मशास्त्र. The most important of धर्मशास्त्र is मनुस्मृति, जो 200 BC से 200 CE के बीच में लिखी गई है. While Brahmin authors of these texts claimed that their point of view had universal validity and that what they prescribed had to be obeyed by everybody, it is likely that real social relationships were more complicated. Besides, given the regional diversity within the subcontinent and the difficulties of communication, it is likely that real social relations were more complicated given the regional diversity. Regions में भी diversity थी within the subcontinent. कम्युनिकेशन में डिफिकल्टी थी. इन्फ्लुएंस ऑफ ब्राह्मण वॉज बाय नो मीन्स ऑल परवेसिव, सब जगह नहीं था. वॉट इज इंटरेस्टिंग इज दैट धर्मसूत्र एंड धर्मशास्त्र रिकॉग्नाइज एज मैनी एज 8 फॉर्म ऑफ मैरिज. ऑफ these the first 4 were considered as good while the remaining were condemned. It is possible that these were practiced by those who did not accept Brahminical norm. तो गोत्र और women. One Brahminical practice evident from 1000 BCE onward was to classify people, especially Brahmins, in terms of Gotra. Each Gotra was named after a Vedic seer, and all those who belonged to the same Gotra were regarded as his descendant. Two rules about Gotra were particularly important. Women were expected to give up their father Gotra and adopt their husband on marriage, and members of the same Gotra could not marry. One way to find whether this was commonly followed is to consider the name of men and women, which was sometimes derived from their Gotra name. These names are available for powerful ruling lineage such as Satavahanas, who ruled over the part of western India and the Deccan, 2nd BCE to 2nd CE. Several of their inscriptions have been recovered, which allow historians to trace family ties including marriage. यहाँ पे देख लो, here the first, fourth, fifth and sixth form of marriage. First, the gift of a daughter after dressing her in costly clothes and honoring her with presents of jewels to a man learned in the Veda from the father himself invite. Fourth, whom the father himself invite. Fourth, the gift of the daughter by the father after he has addressed the couple with the text, may both of you perform your duties together, and has shown honor to the bridegroom. When the bridegroom receive a maiden after having given as much wealth as he can afford to the kinsman and to the bride herself according to his own will, the voluntary union of a maiden and her lover which springs from the desire. ठीक है. Next, देखो name of Satvana king from inscription. There are names of several generation of Satvana rulers recovered from inscription. Note the uniform title Raja. Also note the following word which ends the term Puta, a Prakrit word meaning son. The term Gautami Putra, Puta means son of Gautami. Names like Gautami and Vasishti are feminine form of Gautam and Vasishti, Vedic seers after whom Gotras were named. The Raja Gautami Putra Sri Satkarni, Raja Vasishti Putra Sri Pulmai, गौतमी पुत्र समाश्री जना सतकर्णी, मदारी पुत्र स्वामी सकसेना, वसति पुत्र छत्रपाना शतकानी, हरिता पुत्र विनुकादा, चुतकुलमादा शतकामी, गौतमी पुत्र श्री विजय शतकामी. ठीक है. तो सतवाना रूलर्स एन एस 5. दिस इज वन ऑफ द रियर स्कल्पचरल डिपिक्शन ऑफ अ रूलर फ्रॉम द वॉल ऑफ अ केव डोनेटेड टू बुद्धिस्ट मॉन्क. सतवाना रूलर बना है और उनकी वाइफ बनी है. ठीक है. बुद्धिस्ट को दिया गया था. स्क्रिप्चर डेट्स टू 2nd century BC. Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, one of the earliest Upanishad, contains a list of successive generations of teachers and students, many of whom were designated by the metronomic. Some of the Satvana rulers were polygynous, that is, had more than one wife. An examination of the names of the women who married to Satvana rulers indicate that many of them had names derived from Gotra, such as Gautami, Vasishtha, their father's Gotra. They evidently retained these names instead of adopting names derived from their husband Gotra name, as they were required to do according to the Brahminical rule. What is also apparent is that the some of these women belong to the same Gotra. As is obvious, this ran counter to the ideal of exogamy recommended in the Brahminical text. In fact, it exemplified an alternative practice, that of endogamy or marriage within the kin group, which was and is prevalent among several communities in South India. एंडोगैमी, तो ब्राह्मण क्या सपोर्ट करते थे? एक्सोगैमी, दैट इज आउटसाइड द गोत्र. लेकिन साउथ में सतमाना प्रैक्टिस करने लग गया थे एंडोगैमी. Such marriage among kinfolk such as cousins ensured a close-knit community. It is likely that there were variations in other parts of the subcontinent as well, but as yet it has not been possible to reconstruct specific details. Were mothers important? We have seen that Savannah rulers were identified through metronymics, name derived from that of mother. Although this may suggest that mothers were important, we need to be cautious before we arrive at any conclusion. In the case of the Satmana, we know that the succession to the throne was generally patrilineal. तो succession patrilineal तो बस नाम metronymic में रखा गया था. Mahabharata describes how when war between the Kaurava and Pandava became almost inevitable, Gandhari made one last appeal to her elder son Duryodhan. By making peace, you honor your father and me as well as your well-wisher. It is the wise man in control of his sins who guard his kingdom. Greed, anger drag a man away from his profit. By defeating these two enemies, a king conquers the earth. You will happily enjoy the earth, my son, along with the wise and the heroic Pandavas. There is no God, there is no good in a war, no law and profit, let alone happiness, nor is there victory in the end. Don't set your mind on war. Duryodhana did not listen to the advice and fought and lost the war. So a battle scene. So basically, this is among the earliest sculptural depiction of a scene from Mahabharata. This is a terracotta sculpture from the walls of a temple in अहिछत्र उत्तर प्रदेश में. ठीक है, टेम्पल इन अहिछत्र रेंज उत्तर प्रदेश. अब सोशल डिफरेंसेस की बात करते हैं विद इन एंड बियॉन्ड द फ्रेमवर्क ऑफ. यू आर प्रॉब्ली फैमिलियर विद द टर्म कास्ट विच रेफर टू अ सेट ऑफ हायरार्किकली ordered social category. Caste hierarchically ordered social category. The ideal order was laid down in the Dharmashastra and Dharmasutra. Brahmins claimed that this order, in which they were ranked first, was divinely ordained, while placing groups classified as Shudra as an untouchables at the very bottom of the social order. Position within the order was supposedly determined by birth. फिर आता है धर्मसूत्र एंड धर्मशास्त्र ऑल्सो कंटेन रूल्स अबाउट द आइडियल ऑक्यूपेशन ऑफ द फोर कैटेगरीज और वर्ना. Brahmins were supposed to study and teach the Vedas, perform sacrifices and get sacrifices, is perform and give and receive gifts. Kshatriyas were to engage in warfare, protect people, administer justice, study the Vedas, get sacrifice, perform and make gift. The last three occupations were also assigned to Vaishya. क्या वेदा पढ़ लो, sacrifice करो, gift दो. And expected to engage in agriculture, pastoralism, and trade. Shudras were assigned only one occupation, that of serving the three higher varnas. Brahmins evolved two or three strategies for enforcing this norm. One, as we have just seen, was to assert that the varna order was of divine origin. Second, they advised king to ensure that these norms were followed within their kingdoms. And third, they attempted to persuade people that their status was determined by birth. The Brahminical evolved two or three strategies for enforcing this norm. One, as we have just seen, was to assert that Varna order was of divine origin. Second, they advised king to ensure that these norms were followed within their kingdom. Third, they attempted to persuade people that their status was determined by birth. However, this was not always easy. So, prescriptions were often reinforced by stories told in Mahabharata and older texts. To justify their claims, Brahman often cited a verse from a hymn in Rig Veda known as Purusha Sukta, describing the sacrifice of Purush, the premier man. All the elements of the universe, including the four social categories, were supposed to have emanated from his body. Brahman's was his mouth, of his arms was made Kshatriya, Thai, Vaishya, and fit Shudra. Okay, next is proper proper social role. Here's a story from Adi Parvan of the Mahabharata. Once Drona, a Brahmin who taught archery to the Kuru princes, was approached by Eklavya, a forest-dwelling Nishad, a hunting community. When Drona, who knew the Dharma, refused to have him as his people, Eklavya returned to the forest, prepared an image of Drona out of a clay, and treating it as his teacher, began to practice on his own. In due course, he acquired great skill in archery. One day, the Kuru princes went hunting, uh, and their dog wandering in the wood came upon Eklavya. When the dog smelled the dark Nishad, wrapped in black deer skin, his body caked with dirt. It began to bark. Annoyed, Eklavya shot 7 arrows into his mouth. When the dog returned to the Pandavas, they were amazed at his superb display of archery. They tracked down Eklavya, who introduced himself as the pupil of Drona. Drona had once told his favorite student Arjun that he would be unrivaled among his pupils. Arjun now reminded Drona about this. Drona approached Eklavya, who immediately acknowledged and honored him as his teacher. When Drona demanded his right thumb as his fee, Eklavya unhesitatingly cut it off and offered it. But thereafter, when he shot with his remaining fingers, he was no longer as fast as he had been before. The Drona kept his word. No one was better than Arjun. What message do you think this story was meant to convey to the Nisad? What message would it convey to Kshatriya? Do you think that Drona as a Brahmin was acting according to Dharmasutras when he was teaching archery? Non-Kshatriya ki. According to the Shastra, only Kshatriya could be king. However, several important ruling lineages probably had different origin. The social background of the Mauryas who ruled over a large empire has been hotly debated. While later Buddhist texts suggest that they were Kshatriya, Brahminical texts describe them as being of low origin. The Shunga dynasty, Kanva, the immediate successor of the Maurya Shunga Kanva, they were Brahmins. In fact, political power was effectively upon to anyone who could muster support and resources. जिसके पास सपोर्ट है, जिसके पास रिसोर्सेज है, वो पॉलिटिकल पावर है, उसके पास पॉलिटिकल पावर एंड रियली डिपेंडेंट ऑन भारत से क्षत्रिय. वन अदर रूलर सच एज शाका हु केम फ्रॉम सेंट्रल एशिया वर रिगार्डेड एज मरीच्छा or barbarian or outsiders by the Brahmin. However, one of the earliest inscriptions in Sanskrit describe how Rudradaman, he was the first known Saka ruler, 2nd century CE में थे. उन्होंने ऋषोदर्शन लेक को वापस से बनवाया. This suggests that powerful Malicha were familiar with the Sanskritic tradition. It is also interesting that the best known ruler of Satvana dynasty, the Gautam Buddha Sri Satkana, claimed to be both a unique Brahman, Eka Brahman, and a destroyer of the pride of Kshatriya. He also claimed to have ensured that there was no intermarriage among members of the four one. At the same time, he entered into a marriage alliance with the king of Rudradaman. As you've seen from this example, integration within this framework of caste was often a complicated process. The Satvana claimed to be a Brahmins, whereas according to the Brahman, and king ought to have been Kshatriyas. सतवाना कह रहे हैं कि वो ब्राह्मण है लेकिन किंग को क्या होना चाहिए क्षत्रिय. तो दे क्लेम टू अपहोल्ड the fourfold Varna order, but entered into a marriage alliance with people who are supposed to be excluded from the system. And as we have seen, they practice endogamy instead of exogamy system by Brahmins. तो काफ़ी प्रॉब्लम है ना. And destroy of the bride. Okay, the jati and social mobility. These complexities are reflected in other terms used in text to refer to social category, that is jati. In Brahminical theory, jati like Varna was based on birth. However, the number of Varnas was fixed at 4. There was no restriction on the number of jatis. In fact, when Brahminical authorities encountered new group, for instance, people living in forests such as Nishad, or wanted to assign a name to occupational categories such as the goldsmith or Suvarnikar, not which did not easily fit into the fourfold Varna. So Nishad हो गया, Swarnkar, which did not easily fit into the fourfold Varna system, they classified them as jati. Jatis, which mean a common occupation or profession, were sometimes organized into Shreni or Guild. We seldom come across documents that record the histories of these groups, but there are exceptions. One interesting stone inscription that is 5th century found in Mandsaur. मंडसौर कहाँ पर है? मंडसौर है मध्य प्रदेश में. वहाँ पे एक स्टोन इंस्क्रिप्शन है. कब मिला था? 5वीं सेंचुरी BC में. रिकॉर्ड द हिस्ट्री ऑफ अ गिल्ड ऑफ अ सिल्क वीवर हु ओरिजिनली लिव्ड इन लता. लता कहाँ पे? कहा गुजरात में. फ्रॉम वेयर दे माइग्रेटेड टू मंडसौर. उसके मंडसौर MP में है, लता गुजरात में है, तो गुजरात से मंडसौर आ गए. दे नोन एज द then known as the Dashapura, it is stated that they undertook the difficult journey along with the children Kinpo, okay, as they had heard about the greatness of the local king and wanted to settle in his kingdom. The inscription provides a fascinating glimpse of the complex social process and provide insight into the nature of a guild or shreni. Although membership was based on a shared craft specialization, अगर आप एक पर्टिकुलर क्राफ्ट में स्पेशलाइज हो, ठीक है, शेयर क्राफ्ट स्पेशलाइजेशन, तो आप गिल्ड और श्रेणी बना सकते हो. सम मेंबर्स अडॉप्टेड अदर ऑक्यूपेशन. इट ऑल्सो इंडिकेट दैट द मेंबर्स शेयर मोर देन अ कॉमन प्रोफेशन. दे क्लियरली डिसाइड टू इन्वेस्ट देयर वेल and through their craft to construct a splendid temple in honor of the sun god. Here's an excerpt from the inscription which is in Sanskrit. Some are intensely attached to music, pleasing to the ear. Others, being proud of 100 excellent biographies, are conversant with wonderful tale filled with humility, are absorbed in excellent religious discourse. Some in their own religious side. Likewise, by others who were self-possessed, the science of astronomy was mastered, and other welders in battle even today forcibly cause harm to the enemies. The case of merchant. Sanskrit text inscription use the term vanik to designate merchant. वानिक किसे बोलते हैं? merchant को vanik. While trade was defined as an occupation for Vaisyas in the Shastra, a more complex situation is evident in plays such as Mrichakatika, written by Shudrak. शूद्रक ने लिखा है मृच्छकटिका, ठीक है, 4th century CE में लिखा था. Here the hero Charudatta was described as both a Brahman and Sartvaha or merchant, and a 5th century inscription described two brothers who made a donation for the construction of a temple as Kshatriya Vanik. ठीक है, यहाँ पे एक हीरो है चारुदत्त, described as both a Brahman and Sartava. Sartava मतलब एक merchant. And a 5th century inscription described two brothers who made a donation for the construction of a temple as Kshatriya Vanik. नेक्स्ट देखते हैं बियॉन्ड द 4-1 दैट इज इंटीग्रेशन गिवन द डाइवर्सिटी. अब पता था कि हमारे यहाँ रीजनल डाइवर्सिटी बहुत ज़्यादा है सब कॉन्टिनेंट में. देयर वर एंड ऑलवेज हैव बीन पॉपुलेशन हु सोशल प्रैक्टिस वर नॉट इन्फ्लुएंस्ड बाय द ब्राह्मणिकल आइडियाज. व्हेन दे फिगर in Sanskrit text, they are often described as odd, uncivilized, or even animal-like. In some instances, these include forest dwellers, for whom hunting and gathering remain an important means of subsistence. Categories such as Nishad, to which Eklavya is supposed to have belonged, are example of this. Others who were viewed with suspicion included populations such as nomadic pastoralists, who could not be easily accommodated within the framework of settler agriculture. Sometimes those who spoke non-Sanskrit language were labeled as militia, ठीक है, and looked down upon. There was nonetheless also a sharing of ideas and belief between these people. The nature of relation is evident in some stories in Mahabharata. This is a summary of a story from Adi Parvan of the Mahabharata. The Pandavas had fled into the forest. They were tired and fall asleep. Only Bhima, the second Pandava, renowned for his power, was keeping a watch. A man-eating Rakshas caught the scent of the Pandavas and sent his sister Hidimba to capture them. She fell in love with Bhima, transformed herself into a lovely maiden, and proposed to him. He refused. Meanwhile, the Rakshas arrived and challenged Bhima to wrestling match. Bhima accepted the challenge and killed him. The others woke up hearing the noise. Hidimba introduced herself and declared her love for Bhima. She told Kunti, "I have forsaken my friends, my dharma, my kin, and a good lady chosen you and good lady, chosen you tiger like son for my man. Whether you think me a fool or your devoted servant, let me join you, great lady, with your son as my husband." Ultimately, Yudhishthir agreed to the marriage on condition that they would spend the day together, but that Bhima would return every night. The couple roamed all over the world during the day. In due course, Hidimba gave birth to a Rakshas boy named Gatukaksh. Then the mother and son left the Pandavas. Gatukaksh promised to return to the Pandavas whenever they needed him. Some historians suggest that the term Rakshas is used to describe people whose practice differ from those laid down in Brahminical text. Beyond 4-1, and while the Brahmins consider some people as being outside the system, they also developed a sharper social divide by classifying certain social categories as untouchable. This rested on a notion that certain activities, especially those connected with the performance of ritual, were sacred and by extension pure. Those who considered themselves pure avoided taking food from those they designated as untouchable. In sharp contrast to the purity aspect, some activities were regarded as particularly polluting. These include handling corpses, dead animals. Those who performed such tasks, designated as chandalas, were placed at the very bottom of the hierarchy. Their touch and in some cases even seeing them were regarded as polluting by those who claimed to be at the top of the social order. Manusmriti laid down the duties of the chandalas. They had to live outside the village, use discarded utensils, wear clothes of the dead and ornaments of iron. They could not walk about in the villages and cities at night. They had to dispose of the bodies of those who had no relatives and serve as executioner. Much later, the Chinese Buddhist monk Fa Hsian, फाहियान कब आए थे? फाहियान कब आए थे? 5th century BCE में, 5th century CE में, 5वीं century CE में आए थे. Wrote that the untouchables had to sound a clapper in the street so that the people could avoid seeing them. Another child में Xuanzang आए थे 7th में. अब देखो, फाहिन आए थे 5th में, Xuanzang आए थे 7th में. Also the executioners and scavengers were forced to live outside the city. By examining non-Brahminical texts which depict the lives of Chandalas, historians have tried to find out whether the Chandalas accepted the life of degradation prescribed in the Shastra. Sometimes these depictions correspond with those in the Brahminical text, but occasionally there are hints of different social realities. ये फिगर देखते हैं, यह है डिस्क्रिप्शन ऑफ अ मेंडिकेंट सीकिंग आर्म्स स्टोन स्क्रिप्चर गंधारा, दैट इज द 3rd century CE. Okay, the Buddhist Bodhisatta as Chandala. Did Chandala resist the attempt to push them To the bottom of the social order, read this story which is part of the मतंग जटाका. मतंग जटाका एक पाली टेस्ट है, ठीक है. मतंग जटाका पाली टेस्ट is where the bodhisattva, the Buddha in previous birth, is considered as a Chandala. Once the Bodhisattva was born outside the city of Banaras as a Chandala son and named Matanga. ठीक है, and named Matang. One day when he had gone to the city on the some work, he encountered Ditya Manglika. Ditya Manglika was the daughter of a merchant. When she saw him, she exclaimed, "I have seen something inauspicious," and washed her eyes. The angry hangers on then beat him up. In protest, he went and lay down at the door of her father's house. On the seventh day, they brought out the girl and gave her to him. She carried the starving Matanga back to the Chandala settlement. Once he returned home, he decided to renounce the world. After attaining spiritual powers, he returned to Banaras and married her. A son named Mandavya Kumara was born to them. He learned the three Vedas as he grew up and began to provide food to 16,000 Brahmins every day. One day, Matang, dressed in a rag with a clay armed bowl in his hand, arrived at his son's doorstep and begged for food. Mandava replied that he looked like an outcast and was unworthy of alms. The food was meant for the Brahmins. Matanga said, "Those who are proud of their birth and are ignorant do not deserve gifts. On the contrary, those who are free from vices are worthy of offering." Morning, Mandavya lost his temper and asked his servant to throw the man out. Matanga rose in the air and disappeared. When Tita Manglika learned about the incident, she followed Matanga and begged his forgiveness. He asked her to take a bit of the leftover from his bowl and give it to Mandavya and the Brahman. So basically एक स्टोरी है, क्या लिख रहे हैं इसमें ध्यान से देखो. उसके बाद है बियॉन्ड बर्थ रिजॉर्ट्स एंड स्टेटस. इफ यू रिकॉल द इकोनॉमिक रिलेशनशिप डिस्कस्ड इन चैप्टर 2, you will realize that the slaves, landless, agricultural laborers, hunter, fisher folk, pastoralists, peasant, village headman, craftsperson, merchant, king, they emerge as the social actors in different part of the subcontinent. So basically they were the main actors. So their social positions were often shaped by their access to economic resources. जिसके पास जितना रिसोर्स जितना ज़्यादा वो पावरफुल. Here we will examine social implication of access to resources in certain specific situation. ये देखो ध्यान से, इसमें लिखा हुआ है gender access to property. Consider first a critical episode of the Mahabharata. During the course of the long drawn rivalry between the Kaurava and the Pandava, Duryodhana invited Yudhishthira to a game of dice. The latter, who was deceived by his rivals, staked his gold, elephant, chariots, slaves, army, treasury, kingdom, and the property of his subjects, his brothers, and finally himself, and lost all. Then he staked their common wife Draupadi and lost her. Two issues of ownership foregrounded in stories such as this one. He also figured in the Dhamma Sutra. According to Manusmriti, the paternal estate was to be divided equally among sons after the death of the parent, with a special share for the eldest. Women could not claim a share of these resources. However, women were allowed to retain the gift they received on the occasion of their marriage as Sridhan, literally women's wealth. This could be inherited by the children without the husbands having any claim on it. At the same time, the Manusmriti warned women against hoarding family property or even their own valuables without the husband's permission. You have read about the wealthy women such as Queen Prabhavati Vakataka. गुप्ता की क्वीन थी, इनका वाकाटाका किंग से शादी हुई थी. However, cumulative evidence both epigraphic and textual suggests that while upper class women may have had access to resources, land, cattle, and money, were generally controlled by men. In other words, social differences between men and women were sharpened because of difference in access to resources. अब इनके पास resource नहीं था तो काहे की power. Draupadi is supposed to have asked Yudhishthira whether he had lost himself before staking her. Two contrary opinions were expressed in response to this question. One, that even if Yudhishthira had lost himself earlier, his wife remained under his control, so he could stake her. Two, that an unfree man as Yudhishthira was when he had lost himself could not stake another person. The matter remained unresolved. Ultimately, Dhritarashtra restored to the Pandavas and Draupadi their personal freedom. Next देखते हैं. How could men and women acquire wealth? For men, the Manusmriti declare that there are 7 means of acquiring wealth. पहले तो inherit करते हैं, find करते हैं, purchase, conquest, invest करते हैं, work and acceptance of gift from the good people. For women, there are 6 means of acquiring wealth. तो men के लिए कितने हो गए 7, women के लिए 6. What was given in front of the fire or the bridal procession was a token of affection and what she got from her brother, mother, father. She could also acquire wealth from any subsequent gift and whatever affectionate husband might give to her. Varna and access to property. According to the Brahmanical test, another criteria apart from gender for regulating access to wealth was Varna. As we have seen earlier, the only occupation prescribed for Shudra was servitude, that is, serving all the other one, while a variety of occupations were listed for men of first three one. If these provisions were actually implemented, the wealthiest men would have been the Brahman and the Kshatriya, and that this correspond to some extent with the social realities is evident from the description of priest and king in other textual tradition. Kings are almost invariably depicted as wealthy. Priests are also generally shown to be rich, though there are occasional depictions of the poor Brahman. At another level, even as Brahmanical view of society was codified in Dharma Sutra and Dharmachatra, other traditions developed critiques of the Varna order. Some of the best known of these were developed within the early Buddhism, that is the 6th century BCE onward. The Buddhists recognized that there were differences in society, but did not regard these as natural or inflexible. They also rejected the idea कि differences हैं लेकिन naturally नहीं है, inflexible भी नहीं है. They also rejected the idea of claims to the status on the basis of birth. हो गया ये. उसके बाद है द वेल्दी सूत्रा. दिस स्टोरी बेस्ड ऑन अ बुद्धिस्ट टेक्स्ट इन पाली नोन एज द Majjhima Nikaya is a part of dialogue between a king named Avantiputta and a disciple of the Buddha named Kachana. While it may not be literary true, it reveals Buddhist attitude towards one. Avantiputta asked Kachana what he thought about Brahmins who held that they were the best caste and that all other castes were low, that Brahmins were a fair caste while all other castes were dark, that only Brahmins were pure, that non-Brahmins and not non-Brahmins, that Brahmins were sons of Brahma, born of his mouth, born of Brahma, formed by Brahma, heirs to Brahma. Kachana replied, what if Shudra were wealthy? What another Shudra or a Kshatriya or a Brahma or a Vaishya speak politely to him? Avantiputta replied that if Shudra had wealth or corn or gold or silver, he could have his obedient servant, another Shudra, to get up earlier than he, to go to rest later, to carry out his order, to speak politely, or he could even have a Kshatriya or a Brahman or a Vaishya as his obedient servant. Kachana said, this being so, are not these four Varnas exactly the same? Avantiputta considered that there was no difference among the Varnas on this count. Avantiputta's statement again. What are the ideas in it that are derived from Brahmanical text tradition? Can you find the sources? Not important. An alternative social scenario, sharing of wealth. So far, we have been examining the situation where people either claimed or were assigned status on the basis of their wealth. जिसके पास जितनी ज़्यादा wealth, उतना ज़्यादा social status. However, there were other possibilities as well. Situation where men who were generous were respected, while those who were miserly or simply accumulated the wealth for themselves were despised. तो ये चीज़ ध्यान से पढ़ना. सिचुएशन वेयर मैन हु आर जनरस वर रिस्पेक्टेड, और जो अमीर हैं सारी वेल्थ कर लेकिन दे आर मिजरली or simply committed wealth for themselves, they were despised. One area where these values was cherished was ancient Tamilakam, where, as we saw earlier, there were several chiefdoms around 2000 years ago. Amongst other kings, the chief were patrons of bards and poets who sang their praise. Poems included in the Tamil Sangam anthologies often illuminate social and the economic relationships. I think that while there were differences between rich and poor, those who controlled resources were also expected to share them. Now, the poor generous chief. In his composition from the Purana Ruru, one of the anthologies or poem of the Tamil Sangam literature, a bard describes his patron to the poet. He doesn't have the wealth to lavish on others every day, nor does he have the pettiness to say that he has nothing and so refuse. He lives in a palace, a place and is generous. He is an enemy to the hunger of bard. If you wish to cure your poverty, come along with me. My bard whose lips. So the chief and his followers stone sculpture मिला है अमरावती आंध्र प्रदेश 2nd century CE में. नेक्स्ट देखते हैं हम लोग एक्सप्लेनिंग द सोशल डिफरेंसेस द सोशल कॉन्ट्रैक्ट. बुद्धिस्ट ऑल्सो डेवलप एन ऑल्टरनेटिव अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ सोशल इनइक्वालिटी एंड ऑफ द इंस्टीट्यूशन रिक्वायर्ड टू रेगुलेट सोशल कॉन्फ्लिक्ट. अब बुद्धिस्ट को समझ में आ गया कि सोसाइटी में इनइक्वालिटी है तो हमको इसको रेगुलेट करना पड़ेगा क्योंकि सोसाइटी में कॉन्फ्लिक्ट है. इन myth found in a text known as Sutta Pitaka, they suggested that originally human beings did not have fully evolved bodily forms, nor was the world of plant fully developed. All beings lived in an idyllic state of peace, taking from nature only what they needed for each meal. However, there was a gradual deterioration of this state as human beings become increasingly greedy, vindictive, deceitful. This led them to wonder what if were to select a certain being who should be wrathful when indignation is right, who should censure that we should rightly be censored and should banish him who deserves to be banished. We will give him in return a proportion of the rice chosen by the whole people. He will be known as Mahasamatta, the great elect. This suggests that the institution of kingship was based on a human choice, with taxes as a form of payment for service rendered by the king. At the same time, it reveals recognition of human agency in creating and institutionalizing economic and social relations. There are other implications as well. For instance, if human beings were responsible for the creation of the system, they could also change it in future. ठीक है, अगर कोई सिस्टम बना रहे तो चेंज भी कर सकते हैं. हैंडलिंग टेस्ट historians and the Mahabharata. If you look through the sources cited in this chapter, once more you will notice that historians consider several elements when they analyze text. They examine whether texts were written in Prakrit, Pali, Tamil language. They were probably used by the ordinary people, or in Sanskrit, a language meant almost exclusively for the priest and the light. They also though consider the kings of the text, where these mantras learnt and chanted by ritual specialists, or stories that the people could have read, heard, and then retold if they found them interesting. Besides, they try to find out what the author were perspective and ideas shaped the text, as well as the intended audience, as very often authors keep the interest of their audience in mind while composing their work, and they try and ascertain the possible date of the composition or compilation of the text as well as the place where they have been composed. It is only after making this assessment that they draw on the context of text to arrive at an understanding of their historical significance. As you can imagine, there is a particularly difficult task for the text as complex as Mahabharata. Language and the content. Let us look at the language of the text. The version of the Mahabharata we have been considering is in Sanskrit, although there are versions in other languages as well. However, the Sanskrit used in Mahabharata is far simpler than that of Vedas or of the Prashastis described in chapter 2. As such, were probably widely understood. Historians usually classify the contents of the present text under two broad heads: section that contains stories designated as the narrative, and section that contain discussion about social norms designated as didactic. This division is by no means watertight. The didactic section includes stories, and the narrative often contains a social message. However, generally historians agree that Mahabharata was meant to be dramatic, moving in the story, and the didactic portion were probably added later. Didactic refers to something that is meant for purposes of instruction. Didactic refers to something that is meant for purposes of instruction. Directly refers to something that is meant for purposes of instruction. Krishna advised Arjun on the battlefield. The That's the purpose of instruction. Didactic. The bending days to the 18th century, perhaps the most important didactic section of the Mahabharata is the Bhagavad Gita, which contains the advice offered by Lord Krishna to the Arjun. This scene is frequently depicted in painting and sculptures. Interestingly, the text is often described as an itihas within early Sanskritic tradition. The literal meaning of the term is thus it was, which is why it is generally translated as history. Was there a real war that was remembered in the epic? We are not sure. Some historians think that the memory of an actual conflict among the king folk was preserved in the narrative. Others point out that there is no other corroborative evidence of the battle. Author ended. Who wrote the text? There is a question to which there are several answers. The original story was probably composed by charioteer bard known as Suta. Charioteer bard. Original story was probably composed by charioteer bard known as Suta, who generally accompanied Kshatriya warrior to the battlefield and composed poems celebrating their victories and other achievements. These compositions circulated orally. Then, from the 5th century BCE, Brahmins took over the story and began to commit it to writing. This was the time when chieftains such as those of the Kuru, oh, ये एक book देखना, Lord Ganesha to the scribe, according to tradition, Vyas dictated the text to the deity. This illustration is from the Persian translation of the Mahabharata. So, this was the time when chieftains such as those of the Kurus and Panchalas, around whom the story of the epic revolved, were gradually becoming kingdom. Did the new kings want their itihas to be recorded and preserved more systematically? It is also possible that the upheavals that often accompanied the establishment of these states were old social values were often replaced by new norms are reflected in some part of the story. We notice another phase in the composition of the text between 200 BCE to 200 CE. This was the period when the worship of Vishnu was growing in importance. Krishna, one of the important figures of the epic, was coming to be identified with Vishnu. Subsequently, between 200 and 400 CE, large didactic sections resembling the Manusmriti were added. While these additions are texts which initially perhaps had less than 10,000 verses grew to comprise about 1 lakh verses. दिस इनॉर्मस कंपोजिशन इज रेडली एट्रीब्यूटेड टू अ सेज नेम व्यास. तो महाभारत किसने लिखी है? वेद व्यास ने. महाभारत लाइक मैनी ही मेजर एपिक कंटेन्स विविड डिस्क्रिप्शन ऑफ बैटल फॉरेस्ट पैलेस सेटलमेंट. 1951-72 the archaeologist B.V. Lalde he excavated at a village named Hastinapur in Meerut. Was this Hastinapur of the epic? While the similarity in names could be coincidental, the location of the site in the upper Ganga Dome where the Kuru kingdom was situated suggests that it may have been the capital of the Kurus mentioned in the text. तो बीबी लाल को मिला था हस्तिनापुर. कहाँ पे है? मेरठ में. Lal found evidence at 5 occupational levels, of which the second and third were of interest to us. This is what Lal noted about the houses within the second phases. Within the limited area excavated, no definite plans of houses were obtained, but walls of mud bricks were duly encountered. The discovery of mud